Okay. So, hi everyone. This is Watermelon from Electisec Block 7. Today we have a very special guest, Dacian. I remember reading his blog posts when I was just starting out a couple of years back. And yeah, so Dacian, I'll let you give an intro of yourself if you want to expand on that, and then take us away with your talk. Thank you very much.
Hey everyone, yeah, thanks so much for having me. It's so great to be here. And yeah, I'm Dacian. I'm the audit team manager at Cypherin, and I'm an auditor myself as well. And yeah, I've been auditing smart contracts now for getting close to 2 years full time, and probably something like 3 years as a hobbyist and starting out. So yeah, I'm excited to be here and share some of what I've learned. Shall I kick it off? All right, let's
Please
do it.
do.
Yeah, great. So I've prepared sort of two main themes that I want to cover today. So the first theme will be heuristics, things to look for when auditing. And the second thing will be more the business side, branding, marketing. This is a very important topic as well that's not very much discussed as well. So I have done three other interviews. I've done one with OpenSense where I did a lot of different heuristics. And I've done a FuzzFest with Recon, where all about invariance. And I've done one with Patrick as well, while I talk about the stuff. So for this one, I'm trying to bring new material. I'm not going to duplicate what I've done in the other ones. So if you think of, oh, why didn't he talk about that? It's probably because I talked about it in one of the other ones as well. All right, so let's kick it off. So here we've got this triangle, and I generated this using Grok. I'm trying to use AI a lot more these days, trying to figure out ways to use it. And so we've got this triangle, and this is kind of like the tier list, right? So we've got four main things: checklists, heuristics, invariance, and then external integrations. And typically, at the junior level, if you're an auditor just starting out, you might start out with checklists. There's a lot of different checklists, things to look for. Then as you become more intermediate, you might look at heuristics, invariance, like heuristics are sort of like patterns, properties. Invariants are very much properties of different types of protocols and systems. And then external integrations are all the external connections that protocols can have as well. And it's important to know all these four levels to be, a really good auditor. And I would say that the first three, checklists, heuristics, and invariants, they're things that AI can actually do a decent job of at the moment. And AI will only get better. So AI can be pretty good with checklists. It can be good with heuristics, and it can actually come up with some really good invariants and try to break them as well. Where AI is really weak at the moment, for me, I would say, is at that external integration level. Particularly, the more external integrations a protocol has, the weaker that AI will be, because the search space becomes, so great. So I would say that, we should all be aiming to master all four of these, and we should be aiming to work our way sort of up the pyramid, if you will, up the triangle. But today we're going to look at heuristics. And why heuristics? Well, I think heuristics, they just give you the biggest bang for the buck, right? If we've got 1 hour or 30 minutes or whatever, how can I give you the most value with some general purpose heuristics that you can use to find all sorts of vulnerabilities, right? So this is where you get your most, the biggest bang for the buck, and everyone can learn this. That means that you at home can learn this. So everything that I'm teaching you here today, I learned from nothing, from scratch, right? So you can all do it as well. In fact, anyone can actually learn this and become pretty good at it as well. Now, an important thing is that, you shouldn't just memorize patterns, right? Instead, you should learn to think in principles, So like a junior auditor, they might start by learning a bunch of checklists or maybe learning some heuristics, and they might just memorize the specific patterns of how the code looks. But that's not actually the best idea. I mean, if you need to start there, then start there. But what you want to do is you want to learn to think in terms of the principles of what these patterns show you. Because if you learn the principles, then you can find those same principles when they appear in different forms. Whereas if you just learn a particular pattern, you can only find that pattern, right? So we want to learn to think in principles. I'm going to show you some examples of this, exactly this as well. So, all right, so here's a simple heuristic, access control. So here on the right-hand side, we've got from block threat, we've got the top 10 DeFi attack vectors this year, and insufficient function access controls, $14 million, right, and number 4, right? So you think access control is something so simple. Yeah, it is. It is so simple, but yet, these bugs, they're still slipping through. Now, here we've got an example. This was from a contest. And yeah, it's really silly, right? It's really silly. You've got the mint rebalancer function, the burn rebalancer function, and then you've got the modifier. It's close, but it's not actually on the functions themselves, right? Really, really silly. So this is kind of an example of a checklist level vulnerability where the checklist basically tells you, hey, is the modifier there? If the modifier is there, then it's okay. If it's not there, then it's not okay. So the checklist would have found this vulnerability, right? So a junior can find this vulnerability. Now, the thing is, AI is getting really, really good at finding these vulnerabilities as well. So hopefully that's going to help, because it's going to basically lower the cost of finding these vulnerabilities to zero, right? Which is going to help. But what we want to take from this is we want to learn the principle from this, right? So what is the principle? The principle is that functions with special powers should have access restrictions. And another principle is that actors within a protocol, they shouldn't have more privileges than they're required to do their job. And another principle is defense in depth, right? That when we build protocols, we want to build layers of defense so that, for example, if a certain layer is compromised, we want to limit the damage that can do. And another great reason to learn these principles is because you can translate these to other languages, other platforms. So for example, in Rust-based languages like Move, quite often you'll see that access control and permissions might be implemented by having ownership of an object, for example, not a function modifier, right? So if you understand the principle, you can adapt that principle to different languages, different programming environments. So here's a slightly more complicated example, an intermediate example, right? So what do we have here? And this is, by the way, this is from one of my findings in a private audit for a tier 1 liquid staking protocol, one of the biggest out there. And so here we've got this function that can create a withdrawal request. So with liquid staking, you deposit your ETH, and then you get like an ERC20 token, right? And then at some point you want to cash out, right? You want to, so then you create a withdrawal request, and that puts you in a queue. That's typically sort of how it works. And so here we see that we've got this create withdrawal request. And when we create the withdrawal request, the function accesses this API to get the exchange rate between the ERC20 and the ETH, the native ETH, right? And that rate is going to be used to calculate how much you actually get of native ETH when you trade in your ERC20. So that goes in a queue, and then it sits in a queue, and then we've got this other function, process withdrawals, and this gets called by a bot, right? They have an off-chain bot that calls this function. And this function is actually what processes the queue and sort of, does the payouts for the withdrawals. Beautiful, right? So here we have actually got an asymmetry, right? So we're going to talk about asymmetries later, but we see an example here. So when we create the withdraw, it uses the API to get the exchange rate. But when the withdrawals are processed by the bot, it actually passes the exchange rate in as a parameter. It doesn't use the API. So what does that mean? Well, if we read the rest of the function, we basically see at this final line here that exchange rate that's passed in as an arbitrary parameter gets multiplied by the amount that's being withdrawn. So what does that mean? It means that the bot can actually pass in 0 for the exchange rate and just rug pull all the withdrawals. So imagine that. That's pretty crazy, right? Because it means that it's like a total, full-blown rug pull. And so if we were to use a checklist, is the modifier there? Yes. Yes, in this case, the modifier is there. So a checklist wouldn't have actually caught this issue if someone is just really relying on having a very basic checklist style understanding. They would look at this and say, look, the modifier is there. Only the bot can call this function. Everything is okay. But what if we understand the principle? Well, the principle is that actors shouldn't have more privileges than required to do their job. Boom. Now we would have caught the issue, because we would see that the bot shouldn't be able to set an arbitrary exchange rate, because there's an API to get that. And it's dangerous if they can set an arbitrary exchange rate, right? And the principle of defense in depth, that what happens if the bot accounts get compromised? Well, if the bot account gets compromised, we want to design our protocol to limit the damage that can actually do to the protocol, right? So if we can design the protocol so that if the bot gets compromised, it can't rug pull everyone, then we should do that. And actually, it's very easy to do that. Just don't let the bot pass an arbitrary parameter. Just use the API that already exists. Now, the sad thing about this is that this finding, probably it would have no value in an audit contest, right? In an audit contest, they would just say, oh, the bot is trusted. The bot is trusted. It's all good, right? Has no value. But actually, this finding has huge value in private audits for tier 1 protocols, right? So I audited this with Cypher, and it was actually audited by 2 other tier 1 top firms at the same time, the same commit hash, and both the other firms missed this finding. And that's life, we all miss findings, that just happens. But the client was actually very, very happy with this finding that we found, whereas if it wasn't a contest, it'd be like, invalid basically. So, I just want to point that out, that there are, contests can actually train you to ignore things that are very valuable in private audits as well. So it's just something to be aware of. On to the next one. Now here, this is more intermediate and expert level, right? So it's, everything is kind of, it can be one or the other as well. So we'll give you a range. And this is actually a finding that I got in a major TradFi audit that I've done. So I love auditing TradFi. TradFi is probably one of my favorite things to audit now. It's really, really cool protocols, really interesting, very locked down, very secure, very professional. I really love it. And so this is, I've had to, because we're not allowed to release anything about this audit, no one even knows that we've done it. It's secret as. So I've completely, this code has been completely rewritten. It doesn't look anything like this, but I've just tried to simplify down what's going on for you. And so this is like a massive TradFi protocol where there's fund managers and as part of the protocol, and fund managers, they can administer funds, right? So imagine that there's all sorts of functions that they can call on funds to change things about the fund, to change its variables and how it works, right? And there's this huge access control system that's very fine-grained down to even function selectors and so on. And it just turns out that whenever a fund manager calls one of the external functions to administer a fund, this function, check fund manager access, gets called. Now, I'm really simplifying it down. The actual protocol was it's very complicated compared to this. It's not just one function. There's many functions and stuff, right? But anyway, so the check fund manager access, what does it do? Well, it calls this role registry to check if the caller has the role that they're passing in, which has to be the fund manager role, and to check if that role has access to the function signature. So generally, this looks pretty good. Basically, this will ensure that the caller has the role ID and that the role ID has access to the functions to the function signature, basically, right? So, okay, so that's pretty good. But what's the problem here? Well, the problem is actually it's missing a check that message.sender is actually the fund admin of fund ID, right? So what that means is that any fund admin can perform any of the administrative actions on any fund, including funds they're not an admin of, right? So it means that fund managers can actually interfere with other funds that other admins are meant to be adminning. Right, so it's actually a very bad vulnerability. Again, in an audit contest, this would be invalid because the fund manager's trusted, basically, But actually, in a private TradFi audit, it's an extremely valuable finding. And so, with a checklist, is the modifier there? No, it's not. But there is a call to this access registry that does the job. The access registry does ensure that the role ID is a fund admin and that they have access to the function selector and stuff. So probably a checklist approach likely wouldn't have caught the issue. But if you understand the principle and apply the principle that actors shouldn't have more privileges than required to do their job, now you're going to catch the issue because you're going to see, well, if I'm the fund admin of fund A, then I shouldn't be able to call functions on fund B and change fund B. No, that's not correct, right? So the fund admins have more permissions than they should, right? And we had to tighten this up. So also here, this is an example of finding what's missing. So it's kind of easier to look at a line of code and be like, aha, there is the error. It's in this line here. It's actually much harder to find what's missing. This is an example of finding what's missing as well. So something to look for as well is to look for what's actually missing in the code, what's not there. Here's another heuristic, asymmetry. Asymmetry is a big thing. You'll find it in all sorts of code bases. This is, again, it's another TradFi protocol. So asymmetry. All right. So here we've got redemptions. So the first function, and again, this has been rewritten as well. So here we've got user redemption. So that's where a user initiates a redemption themselves. And here then we've got an admin function called force redemption. That's where an admin can force redeem a user, right? And so there's an asymmetry here where when we do the user redemption, it sets the settled amount to 0. And this is correct because the redemption doesn't actually settle. It just creates an order that gets settled later. So when the order is initially created, the settled amount is 0. And then when it gets settled later, it gets set to the actual amount. But here, when the admin does it, they actually make a big mistake and they set settled amount to the total invested balance. And this actually ends up breaking a key invariant, and it starts to cause a panic overflow in the system for future redemption book settlements, which is a very, very bad bug. It's a really bad disaster, basically. So that was a great finding. And I got this finding by asymmetry heuristic, right? And so how do I find these? Well, I've got a big widescreen monitor, right? And I just put VS Code full screen, and then I just right click on a file, and then I click open to the side. So I've got the same file open on 2 windows next to each other. And then what I do is I just bring up the similar functions side by side, and then I just examine them line by line, right? So I literally brought up the user redemption function on the left, the admin force redemption on the right, and then I just went line by line, examined every line, and that's how I find these asymmetries, right? And one thing that I found in many different audits as well is that I have to pay special attention to admin functions, and especially where there's an admin function that's a version of a regular function, because these admin functions, they're intended to be rarely used, and hence they're often under-tested, and they're just not tested as thoroughly as the main user functions as well. So this seems to work really well for me. Now, we're going to see a slightly different example. This is bad symmetry. This was in a sort of a semi-DeFi project. I would say it's not fully DeFi, but semi-DeFi, and this is bad symmetry. So here we've got a function that prepares some boxes, and there's a safety check, right? So there's a certain set amount of boxes that can be redeemed or prepared, and that's held in storage. And then so every time that we prepare boxes, we basically want to check that we don't go over that limit, right? And once we don't go over the limit, then we decrease the remaining boxes by the new boxes we're preparing, so that eventually we'll get to 0, and then we can't do any more. Cool. And then there's a function that can redeem boxes that have been prepared, in the future. And again, I've simplified this, taken out all the parameters, all the other stuff around it, not related. And so here, this redeem has this safety check, and this is really funny. This is the comments safety check. Validate the remaining boxes amount is not 0. This is ensured by prepared boxes function and validated here as an additional safety measure. So the dev here is telling you, look, don't worry about this. It's all good, bro. Everything's fine. Look, there's no way this can fail because it's ensured by the prepared boxes function that everything's all good. But actually, it's not all good. And why? Well, because the prepared boxes function has this check, and then it decrements the amount, right? So here we're effectively doing this check again, just a slight variant of it. But the problem is that because prepared boxes already decrements the amount, once all the boxes have been prepared, remaining boxes amount is 0. So what does that mean? It means you can't redeem any boxes. It's totally bricked, So yeah, it's a critical finding, beautiful finding here. And this is actually symmetry where asymmetry should exist, right? So this check here should not exist, right? This safety check is actually a critical vulnerability. They've done too much. They were too defensive, too restrictive, and they've introduced a permanent critical DOS here. So again, how did I find this? The same story, right? I just opened VS Code up full screen, open to the side. I had prepared boxes on the left, redeem on the right, and just went line by line. And I saw this, and I'm like, oh wow, this is a symmetry that shouldn't exist, right? Let me go down. Next slide. All right, here's another one. Copy paste fail. Very common, right? So developers, they love to copy and paste. And typically what they'll do is they'll just forget to edit, or they'll edit wrongly. So here, they've copied this, and then they've copied the same thing, but they've just forgotten to change the actual storage slot, right? So you get a storage collision, right? It's a bad vulnerability, basically. And how do I check these? Well, anytime I see these, I always just whip out Chisel, and I just like copy the commented bit and just put it in Chisel and see if the result is the same. And then also another thing I do is I use ripgrep. Ripgrep is really good for doing recursive grep, and I use ripgrep and I just put this in the ripgrep and I see if it shows up in duplicate times as well, and that works as well. So yeah, bad copy and paste often creates bad symmetry. Here's some more asymmetry, a little bit trickier now this time. So this is probably one of my favorite all-time findings, and this is in Beefy, which is a very well-known protocol. This was in Beefy's concentrated liquidity manager, and so you can see I've written the deep dive here. You can go and read all about it there. So this is in Uniswap v3 concentrated liquidity management. So the idea with this protocol is that instead of individual liquidity providers managing their individual positions and wasting a lot of gas and doing, spending a lot of time, they can just deposit into Beefy, and then Beefy will just like run a huge, v3 position and handle all the rebalancing and just do it all for them, basically, right? And it saves gas as well. So it's just an easier sort of user experience, right? Beautiful. All right, so what's the problem with that? Well, the problem with that is obviously, Beefy needs to set ticks to add, remove liquidity. So obviously it's susceptible to like MEV attacks, sandwich attacks and things. All right, so how do they prevent that? Well, they have this modifier called only calm periods. And what that does is it does a bunch of checks on the pool to see if the pool's been manipulated. And if the pool's been manipulated, it'll just revert, right? So the idea is that it'll prevent anyone from like manipulating the pool and then getting it to deploy its liquidity into a sort of a manipulated range. So you see here the deposit function, which calls set ticks and add liquidity, has only calm periods, and indeed almost all the functions that do this have that. But I kept hunting around, and remember what I said about like admin functions, right? The admin functions, they're these things that just the devs don't pay as much attention to them because they're just like, oh, this is an admin function, the admin's trusted, it's that sort of thing. But actually, like, yeah, you can find like really bad bugs in admin functions. So here, this is like critical vulnerability, right? So here we've got set position with and unpause, and they don't have the only calm periods modifier. But look, set position with, this is just like setting a parameter. But look, it removes liquidity and then updates this, then it sets ticks as liquidity, right? But with no protection against pool manipulation because there's no calm periods check. So what does that mean? Well, it means that an attacker can literally sandwich attack this call and drain the entire protocol. And I've got a beautiful POC that shows it in my deep dive and in the solid finding, right? So imagine that you're the admin and you're like, you wake up one day and you got like, 50 million TVL, and you're like, oh, today is the day that I'm going to change the position with. And I'm going to change the position with from 9 to 10. Right, so you whip out your MetaMask or whatever, you do the transaction, change the position with from 9 to 10, and then your TVO goes to 0, basically, and you're like, what the hell just happened, right? Well, that's pretty crazy, right? This is the kind of vulnerability that you can find in these admin functions. And unpause is the same, right? Unpause is the same. Imagine you pause the contract. Imagine this, like you pause the contract because you think, oh, maybe something's going wrong. Let me pause the contract and let me debug and figure it out. So you pause the contract, you do a bunch of debugging, everything's okay, everything's safe. So you think, oh, phew, thank goodness that everything's all good. Let me unpause the contract. So boom, you fire up your MetaMask, you click unpause, and then boom, your TVO goes to 0, right? So yeah, asymmetry is right, and really bad bugs, and focus on these admin functions, because I'm telling you, the devs, they're not focusing on them. The devs are not focusing on them to the same way they focus on the user stuff. All right, heuristic input validation. Again, really, really simple. I posted this on Twitter recently, and people were saying like, oh man, like they should fire the dev, like that people were raging against the developer, all this sort of stuff. But the reality is developers, they make these types of mistakes all the time. It's just what it is, man. Like we're all imperfect. That's just how it is, right? And developers, they're under all sorts of time pressure. The business people, they're like, we need to ship, we need to go live. Like they've got deadlines. Mistakes get made, right? So we need to find them. So here we've got a function, claim all payouts. And it takes in a list of tokens, right? And basically the user calls this to get all their payouts from all the protocol tokens. That's right. The devs keep us gainfully employed. That's right, Mohammed. Yeah. And then what happens? Well, we just iterate over the tokens, right? And then we just call the claim payout method on every token, add it all up, and get our payout. All right, beautiful. So what's the problem here? Well, the problem is obviously that there's no validation that these tokens actually belong to the protocol, right? So a hacker can just deploy his own contract that just implements this claim payout interface and just returns the balance of the contract basically, and then they can just drain the contract, right? So it's input validation is, let's go back to this slide. Function parameter validation, number 7. So the top attack vectors this year, function parameter validation, $14 million, right? Number 7, and it's probably more by now, right? So people say that oh, these bugs are silly, whatever. Yeah, they are, but they're out there, and you've got to find them. You got to learn to find them basically. So this happens when the developers, they just assume that inputs are legit and they don't check the inputs, right? And so we want to look for, do functions correctly handle identical inputs, empty lists, really small or really big numbers? Are they valid addresses? Can we bypass loops with the right inputs? We're going to see an example of that later as well. Here we go. This is a loop bypass. So this is actually from the audit that I just did just the other week, basically. So here there's this function has signed docs, right? And this is in a protocol where to do something you have to sign some documents or whatever. Cool. All right. So what does this do? Well, it iterates over the documents which are in storage, and it checks each one. And if one of them fails, it's false. Otherwise, it's true. All right, beautiful. So what happens if there's no documents in storage? Well, then the loop just gets bypassed and the function returns true, even though nothing's been signed. Boom. Now this isn't as bad here because it's going over storage, but sometimes you'll see this where the user will input a list, but if they input the right list, like an empty list, it'll just be skipped and then it'll just go straight to the return at the end. But yeah, we want to look for loop bypasses, right? So whenever we see a loop, like a for loop that iterates over a set of elements and returns true or false, or returns a number, or lets us do something, we want to ask the question can we bypass that loop so nothing actually gets checked? All right. Now here's my symmetry technique, which I briefly mentioned before. So yeah, widescreen VS Code, open to the side, have the same file side by side, and then here's a slight modification of that. So one thing that I do sometimes is on the right side, I have the storage layout of the contract, which is typically towards the top of the contract where the storage is defined. And then on the left side, I go through each functions one by one. And then for each function, particularly for similar functions like deposit withdraw, buy, sell, mint, burn, borrow, repay, I make a list of all the storage variables that it updates and how it updates them, whether it increases or decreases. And then once I've made that list, I then compare the lists and I see if anything weird stands out, right? So I guess a classic example would be that, a deposit should increase the amount of tokens deposited and a withdrawal should decrease the amount of tokens deposited, right? So I'm looking for things like that I'm looking for, these functions that are kind of mirrors of each other. They should modify the same storage slots, but typically it should be modified in a different way, like in an inverse way, right? And I'm also looking for storage variables that are never used, or storage variables that are written but never read, or storage that is read but never written. Because if I find any of those things, that means I found something is missing somewhere, and then I just need to find what's missing. What did the developer forget to put in? And then I find the bug, basically. Unchecked returns, really simple again. So here we've got a function exchange allowed, takes 2 addresses and returns true. In this case, this function could also revert. It had a bunch of revert conditions. And if those revert conditions didn't revert, then it would return a Boolean based on some properties of the account profiles. And then here we've got this transfer function. And you can see it calls exchange allowed, but doesn't check the return, right? So that means that if the exchange wasn't allowed, the transfer would still proceed and it would still allow the transfer even though it's actually not allowed, right? Again, really silly stuff. I think AI is getting good at catching this. Static analyzers can catch some of this as well sometimes. So, but yeah, do callers forget to check the return value? And this is common with enumerable set as well, because enumerable set has functions that don't revert but return a Boolean. And if people aren't aware of that, or they're just not thinking about that, then that's an easy mistake to make as well from OpenZeppelin's library. multiplication overflow, a recent one from my recent audit posted on Twitter as well. So here, if we're multiplying two uint32s, even if we store the result in a uint256, it'll still go boom, because this conversion won't happen automatically, essentially. So what do we need to do to be safe? We need to first cast one of those things to uint256, then do the multiplication, and that's safer, you know. So
Can I throw a fun fact on that?
Pardon?
Can I throw a fun fact on this?
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
We actually had it in our screening quiz. It was part of the quiz that fellows had to answer.
Okay, cool. Yeah. So basically, just something to look out for. It's usually, if you find this, it's going to be a critical issue, and it's usually it can be hard to find because it's a very it's like a one cast thing, you know. So it's a very small thing. It's like looking for the needle in a haystack, basically. You know what I mean? So you got to have really good attention to detail to find this thing. By the way, the AI that I'm training actually found this as well. You know, so I've trained my own AI that I'm using in my audits. And I never use the AI at the beginning. I always do the first pass myself, but then I bring in the AI for the rest of the audit. And the AI I'm training actually found this as well. So you know, I have trained an AI that can find this, and I think the AI will be able to find this more and more in the future, which is going to be good for this for our industry as well. Yeah. So my AI is Amy. Amy is my AI. I've evolved Amy to be a particular Vault AI, and yeah, I will be open sourcing that later. But I'm so busy at the moment, like with all my stuff. All right, here we go. Another multiplication overflow. So yeah, this is just shows you different ways to do multiplication. So even if we're multiplying to uint256, we can still get overflow, right? So you know, if we want to give ourselves a bit of more protection, we can use these libraries from OpenZeppelin or Solidity as well, right? So it's just something to be aware of, that you know, if these numbers are large, that multiplication can still overflow. You can use Foundry fuzzing to find you know, if the overflows can happen as well for the code that you're dealing with and the expected sort of inputs as well. Here's another one recently on Twitter, again from my last audit. Resetting memory copy, beautiful. All right, so we copy storage to memory, right? So we're caching the memory values from storage. Why? Because we're going to be deleting the storage, right? Because it's time to delete it, time to get rid of it. But instead, we reset the memory, you know, which is like a fail because the storage still has those values, so we can call this again, sort of thing. Here, it wasn't so bad because it's a restricted function. It's kind of like only users can't use it sort of thing. But yeah, this can happen in all sorts of functions and be really, really bad because the storage doesn't get reset. It still contains the initial value. And here is an example of a similar thing where we do reset the storage, but then we read it. So here we copy the storage to memory. Okay, good. And here we correctly reset the storage. Still good. And here, what we want to do now is we want to read from memory, right? Because we copied storage to memory because we're going to delete the storage, so we want to read from memory, but we don't. We read from the storage again, and we're going to be reading zeros or default values because it got reset. This is actually what we meant to do as well. So this is going to be a really bad bug as well. Something to look out for. Precision mismatch. Yeah, so I've got a full deep dive on precision loss vulnerabilities. So you know, check that out. But here I've just got two examples. So here we've got. Basically, I was hunting around this source code, and I just used recursive grep for this particular storage slot around a bunch of different contracts that access it. And everywhere that I found it, I would just annotate like which decimal precision was being used. And eventually, I found that there was a mismatch, that in one place it was being updated with a different precision than in all the other places, and that's a critical vulnerability because it's like the USDC amount deposited. So if that gets corrupted, that's really, really bad. So it's a common bug pattern where typically a protocol will have an internal precision, maybe 6 decimals, maybe 18 decimals, but then the protocol will also interact with a lot of different native tokens that can have different precisions, and then there'll be some code to convert between the native and the external precision. But if you find somewhere where that's not used or where it's used incorrectly, then you can find one of these pretty bad bugs. Usually going to be a critical. Here is, again, the second example. This is where there's no precision scaling. This is a technique I learned from Hans as well. So this is more for just one function. So when I'm in a function, I just annotate each variable with its precision, and then I'm searching for two variables that get added or subtracted using different decimal precision. And then if I find that, boom, that's going to be a critical typically as well, pretty bad bug. And again, it's usually related to like internal protocol versus token native precisions as well. All right, now we're going to rapid fire through some general heuristics. So do many small operations result in the same effect as one large operation? I found some really cool bugs with this heuristic. I actually found a really cool one technique that I use is like black box testing. And that's where I'll basically code up some different scenarios. And then I know how the protocol should react in those scenarios. And I know what the inputs, I know what the outputs should be based on the inputs. And I know what the state changes should be. And I just kind of see what happens. And it's really funny because I just find all these crazy bugs where like what should happen doesn't happen. And then I have to kind of reverse where the bug actually occurs, right? So that's a really cool technique. So I found really cool bugs by using this heuristic and that technique together. So that typically, like, you know, if you do a bunch of small operations, you're not going to get the same state transition as one large operation. And this comes back to like, you know, the way that I see smart contracts, to me, they're just a finite state machine, right? It's just like a finite state machine is a computer science like term that just refers to like a sort of a computing model that can go from one state to another. It's like a deterministic model, basically, that just proceeds from state A to state B to state C. There's different state transitions that are possible, you know. So in many protocols, you should get the same result by doing, you know, a bunch of small operations as doing one large operation. Yeah. So if that doesn't happen, that means something's going wrong somewhere. Off by one errors, yeah, lots of great bugs with this one, you know, particularly where there's slightly different checks in different places, you know, the classic less than versus less than equal to. Using really small values, you know, one way to exploit writing, a lot of the epic hacks do this. You know, you'll see they have like these really weird, you know, one-way transactions. You know, we to a lot of protocols that I audit, I recommend implementing minimum transaction amounts, you know, and just having like, you know, like $1, $10, $100 or whatever, because the reality is like normal users, they're never going to do like deposits and withdrawals for one way, right? It's only going to be like hackers who do that stuff. So why not just like stop it and don't allow it? And then you're kind of, you know, you're taking the cards from the hacker, you're taking the ammunition from their weapon, sort of thing, by cutting off the angles of attack for them, right? You got to think defensively. You know, as an auditor, we should be thinking defensively, and it's not just finding bugs, but we should be recommending to protocols how to harden themselves to take the cards from the attacker's hand, right? To give the attacker less options. Gaps in the test suite, yeah, that's a really good one. Gaps in the test suite is really good to look for places to focus, especially when there's gaps on integration between contracts. Like some test suites, they might have really good tests per each contract, but they'll be using like mocks, for example. So just one contract will have a bunch of mocks for the external contracts, and so they're not really actually testing the integration that good. If you see a coding pattern that's in many places but missing in one place, that's an asymmetry. Front run sandwich attack, we're seeing some of that. Pardon me, let me just drink some water. Spending allowances. All right, this is a really cool one. So sometimes there'll be spending allowances, or there'll be other resources like tokens and fees that are given to other external contracts. But then the main contract that you're auditing will have a function that will update the addresses of those external contracts without first reclaiming those resources. And so then those resources, they're kind of lost, basically. They're just like forgotten about. So this is a really nice one. This is a really big oversight that many developers make. It's a very common bug. It's actually kind of subtle. It's kind of hard to find. Many auditors won't find that. Sometimes if there's a function that allows the changing of a token address, so you can swap for a different token, for example. But what if that different token has different decimals? Well, then if the code doesn't handle this, then it'll start to corrupt the internal accounting, for example, if now you're mixing and matching different decimal precisions with internal accounting. And duplicate values in a list, you know, does this break other functionality? So for example, in a recent audit, we found that when they were adding new tokens or new addresses, it wasn't checking if they're already there. And so it would create duplicate values in a list, and that would like blow some stuff up later on. All right, so we're going to wrap up the heuristics now. I've just given you, a big general purpose list of heuristics. There's lots of other topics I could talk about: invariance, external integration, talk about protocol specific heuristics. I could be here for hours talking about all this stuff, but I've just tried to pack as much value as possible and to give you, just a great list of general purpose heuristics that if you master just these heuristics and get really good at them, and if you understand the principles behind these heuristics, you'll be able to find so many bugs. Like you'll be able to find an insane amount of bugs in like every protocol type, and you'll get a lot of really good value from this. But now I just want to use the rest of the time to just talk about another topic, which is very rarely talked about, and that's the importance of branding and marketing, right? Okay. So, auditing, it is a business. Like, yeah, for me, like I love auditing. Like I love auditing, man. Auditing for me it is the greatest thing in the world. Like auditing is like the best computer game I've ever played. Like I have so much fun auditing. It really is like, I feel like I was born to audit. It's like amazing, right? It's hard to say it's a job, man, because I just love it. I love it. It's amazing, right? But it's also a business, right? And you should have a business mindset as well. So in the audit business, customers, they want to buy two things basically, right? They want to buy great brand value and they want to buy great security output, right? And many auditors, they only focus on the great security output and they actually really neglect building great brand value. And they're actually doing themselves, a really big disservice by doing that as well. So you can be the best auditor in the world, but you can actually have few clients if most of your potential clients, they don't know you exist, right? And just because you're popular or you're well known by other auditors, it doesn't mean that potential clients know or even care who you are, right? You could be a big name among other auditors, but actual like the protocols, the business people, the clients, they might not even know who you are. But on the flip side of this, you can actually be an intermediate auditor and you can be booked out weeks or months ahead if you've mastered sales, if you've mastered marketing, if you've mastered branding and building brand value, and if all the business people know who you are, all the devs know who you are, right? So even if you're just a solo auditor, I would encourage you to take your branding and marketing seriously and to build brand value. And we're going to look at some specifics about how to do that now. So first of all, we'll look at solo auditors, right? So typically, like when you're starting out, you're just going to be like a solo auditor for a while. And then, from that, you can stay a solo auditor and have a great career as well. You can join a firm. You can make like a micro firm, a micro brand. There's a lot of options that you can go, right? But typically, everyone will start like as a solo auditor, basically. Okay, so what should you have? Well, the first thing you should have is you should have a portfolio which has your private audits, your contests, your bug bounties, basically all of your best work in one portfolio. GitHub is the easiest place to put that. I've got a tweet here about portfolio tips about how to structure your portfolio, the things that I look for when reading portfolios. And also what you want to try to do is you want to try to get your name on private audit reports that you participated in, right? And then in a portfolio, you want to have clickable links to every report. And so that, when I'm reading a portfolio, I want to click on the link and then I want to see that your name's on the audit report, right? And this lets you build up a credible body of private audit work. And so, yeah, I know that like there are many firms and there's even many sort of like micro firms or contract shops that, they don't put the auditors' names on the audit report. And to be honest, like that sucks for the auditors basically, because it means that, like it's harder to build your portfolio with that. And so, Cyphren actually used to do the same. So Cyphren, historically, when we were using the full-time auditors would be on the audit report, but when we would use contractors, they wouldn't be on the audit report. And when I became the audit team manager and I designed the Eagle program, which is now a program for contractors, one of the decisions I made with that program was that the Eagles would be named on the audit report. And I didn't have to do that. Like I don't gain anything from that. Cyphren doesn't gain anything from that. But the reason why I did that is because I know how important that is for the auditors themselves, for the contractors, for the sole auditors that we use, in order to help them build their portfolio. So yeah, I would highly encourage you that if you're a solo auditor, if you're a contractor, if you're working at a firm, whatever, that you try and get your name on the audit report if you can as well, because it will help you with your portfolio. All right, this is a really important one, posting on Twitter, right? So it's actually really important that you post to Twitter at least once every business day and that you do this consistently, okay? And just like the vast majority of auditors, even good skilled auditors, they actually don't do this, because they're so busy. They're so busy doing audits, doing everything else, research, whatever, maybe some sales, whatever they're doing, and they don't consistently post every business day. but it's really, really important that you do this. And because by doing this, you're going to build up momentum, right? You're going to, you know, for me, like I've got a shout out to Pashov here, Pashov Chrome on Twitter, because, you know, for a long while on Twitter, I was stuck at like 3,600 followers. And then I saw a tweet from Pashov saying that he's been posting every day since he started his journey, and he's got like 30,000 followers or something. And then I'm like, all right, well, let me try that. And I said, look, I don't want to post on the weekend, because on the weekend I do stuff with my family, particularly my young daughter. I'm always like spending most weekend with her, you know, because I want her to love me, basically. You know, I want her to know her dad and love her dad, right? So I've got to spend a lot of time with her to do that. And I want to see her grow up. I don't want to miss out on the special time, right, when she's 2, you know, 2.5, 3, to see her like learn new things. And I want to teach her new things as well. I taught her how to go scootering. We had a great time. You know, she's awesome on the scooter now. But so I don't post on the weekend, right? But yeah, I do post Monday to Friday, you know, on business days. And yeah, like just posting 5 days a week, minimum once a day. I smashed through 3,600 followers, and I'm up to like 5,500 now. So it's just momentum. Like you just post once a day every business day, and you'll just pick up momentum, and you'll smash through those barriers and get to the next follower count that you want to get to and keep growing. And imagine if you do that for years, like Pashov did, then you get to that, you know, that 5-figure follower count, and that comes with a lot of benefits as well. So yeah, share all types of content. You know, for me, I started off just sharing things I was learning. And then these days I share a lot of interesting findings, right? In a way that I can help others as well, in a teachable way, basically. Also, yeah, for accounts, if you have few followers, then yeah, you know, be a reply guide to larger accounts. Go and reply to Pashov. You know, whenever Pashov posts something, try and think of a good reply that will deliver value, and try and reply, right? And that will actually help you to get followers. So yeah, another thing, you can use what you learn to write high impact blog posts that get featured on Blog Threat Research. I think I've been featured on Blog Threat Research like 13 times with my deep dives. And and yeah, like look, honestly, being featured on Blog Threat Research opened a lot of doors for me. And especially being featured so many times, it opened a lot of doors for me. It was very important for my career. So I would encourage you that if you can do that, if you can take the things you learn and use them to teach it to others through high impact blog posts and get featured on Blog Threat Research, that will it's going to open doors for you as well. So yeah, share all your achievements with the world, right? If you don't tell the world what you've accomplished, then many people, they just won't know, especially the non-auditors who are your potential clients. Remember, auditors are not your clients, right? They're your competition. Your clients are developers, business people, right? You got to let them know what you've achieved, right? And also, finally, if you're a solo auditor, then consider specializing in a niche and being known as the go-to person for that. So we'll shout out to Win Hustler, who's known as the go-to cross-chain person. We'll shout out to MoveJ, who's known as the go-to Move person. And we'll shout out to Castle Chain, Frank Castle, who's known as the go-to Solana person, right? So you can actually have an amazing, awesome career just by picking a niche and specializing in that niche, and being on point with your marketing, your branding, everything, your security output, having everything really good for that niche, and just becoming known as the go-to person for that niche. You can have a great career, make tons of money. All right, now here we're going to talk about brand value for audit firms, right? So, okay, so now you're not a solo auditor. Now you're running a firm. It might be a big firm, might be a small firm, whatever it is, but you're running some sort of firm. All right, so now these things, they do apply to solo auditors as well, but they become way more important at the firm level, basically, right? So as a firm, to build brand value, there's three main things that you want to do. So you want to find ways to signal brand association, social proof, and security output. And here I'll give a shout out to Charles Wang from Belsec. So he's a great auditor, but he also does a very, very good job of these things, of the marketing, the branding and stuff. So I'm going to have some examples for him. He does a very good job. So go check him out if you want to see examples of this. And I'm also going to show, what I do as well. So, there's a saying like, no one ever got fired from buying IBM, for buying IBM, right? And the idea is that IBM basically just became the default purchasing choice, right? And if you're running like a firm, particularly a bigger firm, this should be your goal, right? That you literally want your brand, your audit firm brand, to be the default purchasing choice, that people will say, no one ever got fired for buying Cypher. The idea is that when people think, oh, I need to get an audit, that the first person, the first brand that they want to go get an audit from is your brand, right? That's where you want to get to. And so you see, look at my Twitter profile, right? Look at my background, right? Cypher and trusted by the biggest protocols and change. ZK Sync, Wormhole, Ondo, Sonium, Linear, Lado, Swell, Securitized, Chainlink. I mean, like, you see that, right? And imagine that you're a client and you're looking to spend, like thousands of dollars on an audit, and you're like, well, like, look, Cypher's trusted by Wormhole, they're trusted by Ondo, they're trusted by Curve, by MetaMask, by Starknet, by Beefy, by Dolomite, by Swell. Well, like, I kind of trust them now as well, right? And then you look at Charles, right? Charles has got, trusted by Euler, by Uniswap, by 1inch, by Symbiotic, by Rocket Pool, right? So this, like, brand association and social proof is so important, right? Because it makes the purchasing decision a lot easier for the client. And it just, it removes a lot of doubt from the client, because they're like, well, look, if all these top protocols trust this person and they use this person, then I can use them as well. This is really, really important. So audit firm marketing content generation. So one thing that you want to do is you want to view the audit lifecycle through a marketing lens, right? And you want to find every point on the audit lifecycle which can be used to generate marketing content that does what? That signals brand association and social proof, and also security output, right? So here's some examples. Okay, so you sign a new client. So typically, like, if you're at a, like a bigger firm, you have like contracts basically. So when you're onboarding a new client, you have to, like, you all sign the contract essentially. So when you sign a new client, well, that can actually be a tweet, right? You can convert that part of the audit lifecycle into content. So here's examples from Bell Security from Charles Wang, right? So boom, onboarding Rocket Pool as our new client. So what does this do? It signals social proof, it signals brand association, it signals activity, right? These are all very good things to signal, right? That they inspire other potential clients with confidence. They're like, oh, wow, Bell Security is used by Rocket Pool. Oh, maybe we should use Bell Security, Now, Bell Security, they're safer to use because Rocket Pool is using them. It's this sort of thing, right? And here's another example too, starting a new audit, right? So you can do a tweet when you onboard the client, you sign the audit contract, and then when you start the audit, that's another tweet as well, right? Where we are currently in the process of conducting an audit for Camelot Dex. So now we've started the audit, boom, that's another tweet, slightly different. But again, what does it do? It signals social proof, signals brand association, signals activity. Again, it makes the purchasing decision for potential clients much easier, right? Because it's pumping up your brand value by signaling these very important things to the market. Here's some more. So these are some examples that I do. And by the way, just to say, like, you need to get the client's permission before you do this, right? So don't just go and do this by yourself. Like, you have to work it out with the client. You can work out like co-marketing agreements. Like, some clients they'll really like this. They'll want to do it themselves. Other clients, like we have other clients at Cypher, that they do not want any of this. They don't want anyone to know that we're auditing them. They never want anyone to see the report or the vulnerabilities, or they just want everything silent and quiet. But other clients are very happy, so you have to work this out with a client. Don't just go and start doing this without making sure the client is cool with it, all right? Here's some examples from what I do. So again, now this is where the audit is finished, and we've got a draft report that we present to the client. Boom, we can convert this into content generation, right? In this tweet, shout out to Stalin, Ethan, myself for this amazing result, blah, 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 we found. And then I just have the findings page and everything censored out, because see here, I'm not mentioning the client, and the findings are all censored because we don't have the permission from the client for this, right? So, so basically we can't say who the client is. We can't say what the findings are. There's no, none of that. But we can still use this to generate, an article, that a tweet that signals security output now. See, these ones here, they didn't really signal security output. They just signaled social proof, brand association, activity. But now with this one, we can actually signal security output and social proof as well for the auditors. One thing that I'm doing now as audit manager is I'm giving the auditors a shout out, both our internal full-time auditors and also our Eagle contractors. Whenever they do a good job on an audit like this, I'm going to give them a shout out on Twitter And why? Because it helps them, because it helps their own brand, right? And I want to do what I can to help, other auditors basically to be a blessing to them, really, right? But this is also great for my brand, for the Cypher brand, because we're signaling social proof, and also security output. And then here we go. This is where the audit is finalized. So now we've done mitigation review. The audit has been finalized. We've got the client's permission to upload the report to our public GitHub. And so here we do another tweet now, and now we give another shout out to the auditors to help them out as well, right? And then we tag the client, and then we also, have the findings now fully uncensored, basically, and then there'll be a comment reply that actually links to the report as well. Right, so this is a really great tweet. Why? Because it hits the trifecta. So this tweet, it signals brand association, it signals social proof, and it signals security output. So we're hitting all three nails with the hammer on this tweet. So this is a great tweet. It's fantastic. And here's another one. So this is where like if you have you've got your personal page, but then you might have a brand page, like we've got Cypher. And so here you can also post these ones. When you finish the audit as well, you can post from the brand page, tagging their brand. And again, it's this is the same message, but now it's from a different account. Part of marketing as well is having the same message, but from different sources, and having the client or the potential client hear the same message from different sources. That also gives the client more confidence to make a purchasing decision. It makes it easier to get the sale, basically, because the client has more confidence when they hear the same messaging from different sources. So here from the brand account, again, we're signaling, what are we doing? Signaling brand association, signaling social proof, signaling activity, and we have a link to the report to signal security output as well. And here's another one. This is like an epic audit day. So, like you might do an audit, it goes for like, 3 days up to, 30 days, right? Whatever. But let's say you have a day where like you just crushed it on that day. You just pumped out so much output. You absolutely killed it. Well, boom, this was a great tweet, right? This was an epic first day of a new private audit, beast mode engaged. Look at all my findings. You can see like 7 hours ago was the first one, and then like up to 1 hour ago. So I had like a 7-hour stretch where I was just like nonstop just pumping out sick findings. And yeah, that was like amazing, right? I killed it, man. And of course, here the audit is still ongoing. We can't say who the client is. We've got to censor everything out, right? But yeah, it's a really good tweet. It did, it did really well. I got a lot of likes for me, for my account size. That's good, and also the views. That's good. So that was a great tweet. So that's another part of the audit lifecycle that I can harness to signal. What am I doing here? I'm showing epic output, right? I'm signaling security output, which is very important as well. Here, this is something that I've done where I've basically, the way that we have our private audits on the public GitHub repo, I've vibe coded an AI program in Python that can automatically generate these additional tables. And these additional tables basically give us an average findings per audit for each of the different protocol types. And so now I'm using this for marketing. So for example, when clients come to us for a quote, I can very easy, so let's say if they're a Vault protocol, I can send them a link and show them this, like, oh, boom, look, we've done 15 Vault audits and we have an average crypt high of 2.53 per Vault audit. Well, that makes the purchasing decision a lot easier for the client, doesn't it? Because they're like, wow, you've done 15 Vault audits and you've got an average finding rate of 2.53 criticals per Vault audit. Wow, I have a lot more confidence that I'm going to get, really good value for money in terms of the security output, right? And so, and then also we can use this for tweets, for marketing, right? So that these types of tweets, and so what does this do? It signals it's all three. It signals brand association because you can see all the protocols we've audited. It signals social proof for the same reason, and also security output because you can see that, look, we're actually a legitimate security company. We're not just a marketing or branding company, but we're a legitimate security output generating really good security output. And another thing is client feedback, right? So client feedback, so this also hits all three, the trifecta: security, it signals brand association, it signals social proof, and it signals security output. So here we woke up to this lovely message, lovely message. Here, it's even better if the client posts it and you retweet it. That is like the ideal situation is where the client we'll publicly post it. The most common is like the client will just message us on Telegram or on Slack and tell us what a great job we did. And then when we do that, I can take a picture of that, but I don't identify the client because the client has given me permission. So I just post the text that the client wrote. But if I don't identify the client because we don't have permission to. But when the client tweets it and tags us and stuff, then you want to retweet that and get all over it because that's the ideal. Now, another technique as well is that you want to like, so we're gonna go into sales a little bit here, just cover sales a little bit. You want to reach out to existing clients, right? So one thing you want to do is the devs that you follow, the devs that you do audits for, you want to follow them on Twitter, and you want to like just keep an eye on them from time to time and see what they're doing. And what you'll find is that devs, they'll move around from one protocol to another, right? And if the devs like you, they can actually recommend you, and that can be a big thing to help you get audits. But also, what you want to do is every few months, you want to reach out to existing clients just to reconnect, right? So because like everyone's really busy in this industry, man, particularly if they're really booked up, they've got a lot of work on, everyone's really busy, and it's really easy like for them to forget about you. And that's even if you did like an amazing audit for them, they can still just forget about you because just, like they got so much new stuff going on now, right? So yeah, just every few months you want to reach out, reconnect. And the beauty of this is that this isn't a cold DM. Like it's not like a cold call or a cold DM because you already have a relationship with them. And if you did a great job for them, then they already like you, right? So it's not, you're not like annoying them. And just say something like this, right? Like, hey, now I just want to check in. Look, one of our researchers, they wrote this, this article on X, like on whatever topic. And we think it might be relevant to you, to the protocol you're working on. And look, just to let you know, I had a great time working on that last audit together. And, if there's anything that we can help with, we're here to help, basically, right? Just something like that. And literally like this week, we just did this with like a tier one it's literally one of the biggest protocols in its category. And all we did was just send a message like this, and we booked an awesome audit from it. Because they were like, yeah, actually, we've got this new stuff and we need an audit. Can you help us out? And it's like, yeah, boom, we got it done, right? So yeah, like just don't pester them, right? Don't be annoying, don't pester them, but also don't just disappear and never contact them again. Like be smooth, find a balance, right? And so this is the summary. It looks like I'm on time. Yeah, all right, awesome. So yeah, always be tweeting, right? Always be marketing. And always be, building brand value by generating content that signals brand association, social proof, and security output. And yeah, but don't just be a marketing firm. Obviously, like you need to generate good security output as well, right? But don't ignore the branding and the marketing and the sales aspect. That's very, very important from a business point of view. All right, thank you so much for listening, and I'm all done.
Thank you, Dacian. That was truly an awesome talk. I love the second half. You focus on marketing, and you don't hear about it as often as you should, right? So it's awesome hearing your point of view on that. I'd like to ask the fellows if there's any questions they'd like to ask on Dacian's presentation or anything in general towards our kind guest here.
Yeah, I'd be curious to learn more about like the AI you built and how that's like integrated into your workflow. And like before you built this specific thing, like what were you doing before with AI?
Yeah, sure. So I've used Claude to basically self-evolve an AI, a specialist AI, right? So like one thing that I found playing around with AI is that like the first thing that I did is I just start a new Claude session, and I just drop some contracts into Claude, and I just be like analyze these contracts. And then I would give it another set of contracts, and I basically found that it would perform better on the second set of contracts than the first set. And I researched why that is, and it's because like it's like it's just like how a human works, where like so let's say that, for example, like that you've audited a bunch of like DAOs, right? And then you come to audit another DAO. You're probably going to be really good at finding vulnerabilities because your brain is really hot for auditing DAOs, right? Your neurons are really firing and they're focused on that. Well, AI actually kind of works the same way, right? So you've got to prime the AI basically, right? So like if you want the AI to audit a vault protocol, then the ideal situation is that you've shown it a bunch of vault protocols before that, and then you show it the one you want it to audit, right? So you want to prime the AI. But the problem with that is that like you can't just show the AI like tons of vault protocols. It's too expensive, like in terms of the tokens and stuff, and it takes too long, right? So the way to get around this is to create what's called a primer document, right? So a primer is like a markdown document that basically has almost like all the most important info from the audits recorded in. And then when you start a new session, you just ask the AI to ingest the primer. And so what I did with Claude is I got it to create and then evolve its own primer. So I would just show it, like I just showed it, I took all the vault audits from the Cypher and public repo, the GitHub repo, and then I just show it one audit and then show it the vulnerabilities and then that we found from a markdown, the markdown file that we have with the findings. And then I'd ask it to update the primer, and then I just did that over and over again. And then I went and found like other audits from other firms and audit contests and stuff for vaults. And then I showed it some general purpose heuristics as well. And so I basically just I let it evolve itself by letting it write and update its own primer. And I was just like a curator of sorts that I basically showed it I selected the inputs that it used to generate the primer. And so now
the like specific code, or are you just like giving it the report and maybe a few snippets?
Yeah, so for the first like I think three or four or five, I showed it the code and the findings, and then for the rest I just gave it the findings. Yeah, and so what I do with it now is I always audit the code first myself, but then I will use it after that to see what it can find, and I will ask it to like generate me invariants and to see if it can break the invariants. And there's different ways. And I can ask it to explain things to me to see what its understanding is. But it can find some really good things. It is quite useful. But it's also kind of dumb sometimes. Like it like hallucinates, and it has like false positives that are just dumb, like that a human basically would know that that's a false positive. So it's still not very smart. But I think we're just at a very early stage, right? And it's going to get better. And the challenge for us is to figure out how we can integrate it into our workflow. Has it amazed me after my initial review? Yeah, I mean, it's found some cool things, not that I missed them, but I was surprised that it found them, basically, right? But that's why that's kind of why I posted like, oh wow, like this AI is kind of like a junior auditor, basically, and in some ways it's actually can be a little bit better than a junior auditor as well. So. Are there any other questions?
Doesn't seem like it. So, Dacian, I want to thank you again for taking your time to speak to us, to walk us through your heuristics lists and guide us through your marketing and value proposition efforts on social media. It's been very interesting to hear your inputs. So thank you very much again for taking your time, and take care.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me. And yeah, wish everyone all the best. Take care. Bye.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Thanks, Dacian. Thanks all. Bye.